Hello and welcome everyone. It's Suzanne here from the Project Manager Clinic, and today we've got some fantastic experts here to talk to us about storytelling in project management, the power of storytelling in project management, which I've got to say, I didn't even know was a thing until I saw this title and thought we best talk about it really. So some of the areas you might think storytelling won't apply, well, you might be surprised as we talk through this today. And if you're a person and you've got data coming out of your ears and your status reports are falling flat on people or stakeholders are starting to turn a blind eye to you, potentially this is a technique that might enliven your project. So with me today, I've got the wonderful Brendan Nelson. And Brendan is Managing Director and Principal Engineer of JC Engineers. And we're really pleased to have you here. Brendan, how are you?
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, everybody. I am really looking forward to this. Like you, Suzanne, didn't really think of storytelling in project management until you were thrust within it, and all of a sudden, out it came. So, looking forward to it.
It's sort of like almost the opposite of what you think project managers can do. And it sort of goes into that creative side a little bit. I've also got Elena Daly with me, and Elena is an expert. Well, she's very, very experienced in strategic change and capability, organisational capability. I would guess people-centred design and execution. How are you today, Elena?
I'm very well, Suzanne. Very nice to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I'm very pleased to have you. And of course, for those people that know and are regulars to the channel, Margaret DeSantos is here, and she's only here for half an hour, and she's really just a visitor today, but who knows what she might input. So if you're watching, please subscribe to the channel. Give us a thumbs up. There's plenty more to come. So look, I'm going to probably just throw this out there. Storytelling in project management. I believe it's a strategic communications tool, builds emotional connection. We all know these sorts of things when we're talking about storytelling for our children and things like that. But Brendan, I'm going to start with you. In your field, how does storytelling come into it all?
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. I mean, for me, as I alluded to, storytelling wasn't something that you would sort of associate with project management, particularly coming from the engineering field, dealing with a lot of data, dealing with a lot of sitting behind the computer and looking at spreadsheets as such, and then coming out into the project management side of things on the construction site in particular. I found that a lot of the time when you're liaising and talking with particular stakeholders, clients, even people within your own crews, your own employees as well, now obviously managing JC Engineers, setting the scene and delivering that narrative and being able to actually highlight the key aspects of what the project is actually doing is vital.
Look, I did a project ages ago, years ago now, and there was a whole bunch of engineers, and I love engineers because I've sort of got that, my brain sort of works that way, and they were engineers in long distance gas piping, right? Mm. And I was working in the IT area. And they just could not get their head around what we were talking about in IT. And I started talking to them. I know this is not necessarily a story, but it's building, it's creating a scene for them, right, and explaining things. So I said, well, you're out there on the pipeline and you've got all these connectors and, these pipes go this way and these ones go that way and these ones connect to a main area and these ones to satellite. Well, that's how it is, in computer land. That's pretty much what we're talking about. And then we talked about the throughput of the pipes and the throttling of the pipes, which, Margaret, you will know, these are all like technology terms, that we talk about. And they instantly got it. So now what's the difference, Brendan, between that and a story? Or is there no
Well,
difference?
well, I think from an engineering perspective and a construction perspective, you got to set the scene early, right? I use the term a lot. You only know what you know. And when you're talking to particularly stakeholders, some stakeholders are seeing particular construction activities or long distance pipelines for the first time. They've got no idea what
Yeah,
you're talking about.
right.
When I relate back to my own team, I bring them back to perspective and what is perspective? Perspective is built on experience. If I said, Suzanne, tell me about the moon's surface, and I'm assuming you haven't been to the moon, Suzanne, but
Not lately.
you would describe the moon's surface, and you would describe it based on your experience, and your experience is based on media or based on
Yeah.
movies or somebody else's take on what's happened. Unless you're Neil Armstrong or someone who's been to the moon, then you're actually going to tell me somebody else's experience. So if you're going to set the scene for the project, you're wanting to talk to someone about that you can relate to their actual experience. Then when you relate to them, you can start setting the scene and you can build on that.
Right. Okay. So for a project manager and for an engineer, Elena, this is a skill that we often do not have. I don't mean to be rude. And we're all, as project managers, we're all developing these com skills, right? Interpersonal, all touchy-feely stuff. But it hasn't naturally been the case. So how on earth do you introduce this into an organisation as a thing?
Um, it's really interesting to listen to you both because to me, project is about people and people connect through the stories. Been connecting since, dinosaur ages. We tell the story to each other. We communicate before we even could speak properly and could write properly. So for me, storytelling was always part of any project. And years ago, I used to work in a big FMCG company, and I was running, SAP data training sessions. And I used story back then because data is very dry. So how do you explain to people the concept of different gates and different master data and supplementary data
Yeah.
without connecting the dots and without using just simple terms and less technical jargon? So I guess the most important thing to remember that any project depends on people, adoption, and understanding. So I loved when Brendan said it's how people can relate to that. So the first step will be understanding the audience, understanding what people experiencing right now, why this project is taking place, what pain points we're trying to solve, and then create the story based on that. And it might be multiple stories. For the executive team and CEO, will be one story because they want to listen about, number the achievements, the
True.
budgets. For
Yeah.
people leaders, it can be all about how their work can be simplified, what productivity will look like after the project implemented. But for subject matter expert, it can be completely different as well. So to answer your question, I would start with understanding the audience.
Right. And that's so important, as you said. If you've got an executive, I often find that graphs and pretty pictures are usually the best way to communicate with them in a presentation. I don't mean to be rude again. I was an executive, but they don't need that detail. Well, they need the facts, right? But they don't need the super detail that somebody else in your team or another stakeholder might need. And this is a key thing that we find with project managers quite often. They don't recognize, they don't read the room, basically. They don't know not just who their stakeholders are, but how their stakeholders are going to ingest the information. And I think that's probably a key thing. Um, I'm just going to throw quickly to Margaret. Margaret, have you heard of this stuff? storytelling and project management?
I have, and I think the most powerful story are usually the true stories, the ones where people have experienced, an actual thing, and they actually then tell that story to explain a concept. And, I recently went to a face-to-face webinar or seminar hosted by the Project Management Institute and, for the Sydney chapter. And there was a actual story about change management, and they were talking about how the delivery was seen as successful, but the actual adoption and implementation didn't happen because the users actually went on strike. They weren't happy with the technology. So in fact, it was difficult for the sponsor to basically recognize that there was an actual benefit because the users weren't happy with the fact that there was no training, there was no user acceptance, and so
basics.
they just
Those basics that we talk about all the time.
And it was actually a very famous New South Wales government department, which I'm not going to actually basically say here, but
probably in the news.
But when that story was actually told, then quickly people understood about the change management and why the benefits were not realised. It was because of that non-adoption of a new technology or a new system. So that was actually a very interesting story.
Yeah. And I suppose really we're all telling stories as project managers to get a point across, but not necessarily understanding that as this storytelling as a skill set. But Brendan, how do you know when it's a spin and not a story? Like, what's the difference there? Because we know people can tell stories that are really spin.
No, I think Elena touched on it earlier. Factual. You need to have some part of your story needs to be factual. You then need to tell a story that aligns with the values of the project and the people who are implementing the project themselves. So it might be the stakeholder might have some involvement, might be the sponsor, might be the principal, whoever that might be. You need to understand, well, what is it that they're trying to achieve from this project? What are the objectives, and how do I get them to believe in this project? If they believe in it, then the project's going to be successful.
Okay, so I can probably see a difference between somebody who's inspiring because they're telling anecdotes or stories. But is this the new plot twist? Is this the new project management secret weapon? And we talk about the project manager's secret weapon quite often. And I think, Elena, you might have touched on this, weaving stories into presentations. As project managers, we generally, if we're lucky, share lessons learnt, but sometimes that happens after we've gone, the lessons learnt. Involve the team. You talked about that, Elena, and I think you did too, Brendan. Be creative. Like, how do we actually do this? Like in practice, how do we actually, as a project manager, become the storyteller?
I don't think it's really hard. I listened to podcasts, and there was a director of IT. I can't remember the name of the company, but he started story, and he had a very simple PowerPoint presentation. He had a number on the screen, 50 or 500,000. So he opened it like that. It made people wonder. And then he said, this is how many times the cyber attacks happened in our company. So I think opening like that is powerful. It bringing people on a journey, showing the scale. So very dry cybersecurity program can actually be turned into the shield for the company and then you bring into perspective data and people, vulnerable people, and yourself, your data will be attacked. This is the storytelling. So I don't think it's really hard. Yes, we have to be creative, but we also have to connect with the purpose. When I do it, and I did the change story masterclass in my previous company, we start with why this project taking place. You will be surprised, and it became a running joke, how many people said, because my manager told me so.
Yeah.
Because they don't go into details, understanding. And when we start digging, we find because a previous process didn't work, or because cyber attack actually happened, or because we have a new legislation. So there are legitimate reasons, but we never, as project managers, take time to understand the details. We jump into the tools and frameworks, and we try to track it in Jira or whatever tool we use and have everything ticked in there. But there is lack of this analysis at the very front and understanding.
Yeah, look, Brendan, I think this has got to be a different skill set for your general project manager and potentially somebody in engineering who, well, you know, typically I've worked with engineers and they can be a bit of a dry bunch, very blunt and to the point, which I like because that's how I am too.
Yep.
How does it go in your environment? Like we're sort of talking a bit about change management, but we're talking about it being project manager led in this case.
Yeah, exactly. And change management, you're talking about multiple, changes in several construction activities that might be overlapping at the same time. So you've got conflicting complexities, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Me myself, I always relate exactly what Elena just said, relate back to the data. I bring the data out, I look at the stats, and I hit home with that data. But I also say, well, a number's just a number unless you tell a story. So you need to go behind it and actually have a look at what this number actually means and what is our objectives and our goals for this number. Let's measure this. Let's track this. Let's see how close we're getting to it. Can we do better, or are we just not going to achieve it? And why are we just not going to achieve it? Right. So why is that going to happen? And then comes back to starts with why.
So can anyone give me an example of a story that they have used or told on a project?
Well, I can actually say that when I was setting up an agenda for a decision to be made, I started off with the Alice in Wonderland story where she asked the Chessy cat, which direction will I take?
Oh.
And the Chessy cat replies, I don't know what direction you want to take. It depends where you're going. And if you don't know where you're going, then it doesn't matter which direction you take. So I started with that as an introduction to the agenda, because the decision had to be made in terms of the strategy in which way we were going, which would then determine which direction to take.
Wow.
And everyone just thought that was fantastic. They just laughed at that and just thought, wow, what a great introduction to setting the agenda.
It's a fantastic one. What about you, Brendan? Have you got a story that you've actually used?
Oh, look, I think for me, I try and set the scene and where is the project starting from when I've picked it up, for example. So we might not pick up projects right at the start. We might have skipped the planning and the strategic phase. We might look at the particular highlights or achievements that have got the project to here, and then we go back and we go, okay, well, why is this important? Let's go back to our stats and our data, and we go, okay, this is what we're going to deliver to you. This is our foresight. This is our expectations. And we're going to deliver that to you. And if we don't, if we don't deliver that, we're going to tell you why. So it's, for me, it's looking at the broader picture. Like your project is a piece in the pie. You just got to figure out what that pie is.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like articulating the journey. And I suppose that could be a story in a way. And as project managers, we often arrive at a certain point in the journey. But I've always found it beneficial to articulate where I am on the journey, or where the project is, where we've come from, where we're going, and focus on that larger purpose of what the project is actually supposed to be doing. But Elena, how do we train people? Like, where do we even start? Or are people doing this without even knowing? Project managers sort of doing this without even knowing?
I think some of them definitely do. And I think there is a line between change management and project management, which is quite blurred now.
Yeah.
I truly believe that a good project manager can use a lot of change management skills and techniques as well. To answer your question about where we start, definitely not at the lessons learned at the end of the project, because it's too late. And a good practice to collect the lessons learned as you go at each stage, if you want. If you design the solution, collect your lessons learned, analyze what you haven't done, and maybe then create the story if you haven't done it at the beginning. What I absolutely love is using pizza formula in my storytelling. So very simple, simplified. So once upon a time, it's explaining the history of the company, of the project. And every day these people did something specific, which is painful and repetitive. And then something happened, the event. And this is why they needed to they needed to implement new ways of working. And at the end, we have this solution, we have this future, which is bright. Very often we start with the last part, but creating this story, as you say, taking person on a journey, it helps us to connect with them and understand that we actually been in their shoes. We know what they experienced, and we know their pain points. And I think this is not happening. So if organizations can start with this very simple formula that people can get very excited about, and I've seen people created videos based on that for their stakeholders, which is fantastic and can be used with a lot of AI right now. I think you can't go wrong with this approach.
So you just mentioned if people can create videos for their stakeholders. Now that's very interesting, because that was something that I heard just recently as well, with a large number of stakeholders. But in this situation, we weren't talking about a big broadcast and an informational type video. We were talking about sit downs, interviews like I'm doing here, but 10-minute ones with key stakeholders, and getting to know those key stakeholders and getting them to tell, I guess, their story as to why they're interested in this project, what's their part in that jigsaw puzzle. So that's really interesting. And Brendan and Elena, you might want to jump in as well, but we often in the project management clinic webinars, we try and bring everything back to our project management tools and our techniques. So we're often talking about dealing with aggressive people, dealing with conflict in our projects, and sometimes we'll talk about issues management or how to bring the temperature down in the room. Have you had an example, Brendan? I'm not sure if you've had this example where there's a lot of conflict, or there's a person that's very aggressive on your project. It's very disruptive. How do you deal with that? Can you use storytelling in that instance?
Oh, most definitely. Myself coming from a construction background, I don't shy away from a conflict. But I'm happy to sit and listen. And I think what you have to do is you have to listen. The key element of us as humans is empathy, right? So we need to empathize with the individual. We need to understand what's happening. Now, this particular individual might have something that is particular to the project that might be upsetting them, or it might be something outside of that, and then they've brought that stress from home or outside of the project to the project itself. So you need to understand, why are they in this situation right now, calm the situation down just by listening, and then address the situation later on when the dust has settled a little bit.
It's a really powerful skill, isn't it? To listen.
listening. I don't think we do it enough.
We don't do it enough. And as project managers, very often they are so tactically focused. And we talked about this a little while ago too, about AI and project management and how is that going to affect project management. And one of the things we talked about is project managers need to look more strategically. They need to be more advisory. They need to be able to really understand the analytics and deliver that information. And this is possibly a really good way of doing that. Margaret's just gone. Thanks, Margaret. Yeah, so how do we start? Elaine, have you got any ideas about how does your average project manager start to do this?
There are lots of things that project manager can do themselves for their professional development, of course. But I also think there is a big change has to happen with organization, because you mentioned strategic business partnering, and this is exactly what I'm trying to implement, in the organization I'm working for. If project managers can change their attitude and imagine themselves as a strategic business partner. So they don't come with all this knowledge to impose it on organization. They come, as Brendan very skillfully said, to listen, to understand the problem, to show empathy, and only then jump into solutions. So I think changing of mindset is really, really important. And only when they analyze the situation, and that's what a lot of external consultants do. They analyze the situation and then they say, okay, based on what I've just learned, these are the project management tools that can be really beneficial in this particular environment.
Exactly. And it's interesting you touched on consultants, because project management is one of those areas where the project manager is often not of your organisation. They may not be a consultant project manager, but they may be hired in for a particular amount of time. So as much as the recruiting manager tries to get a good fit culturally, potentially, in theory, that person still is going to bring their own attitudes, their own ways of doing things. So that makes it a little bit more difficult, doesn't it, in terms of this consistency of attitude that you were talking about, Elena. But I guess that's now we need to be pushing this up now more to the executives in the organisation, and that's probably more a change management type thing as well, to make that awareness happening.
Suzanne, I just wanted to add as well, and I'm sure Brandon has a lot of thoughts on that, but I've never seen an organization that done strategic business partnering very well. Some people are better than others, but I can't say, okay, I worked for the company and they were really good at it. No, it's a lot about, preserving their own status quo, their own expertise, working in silos, which, I don't understand why would you? You can learn so much from each other. So we are working towards that. I think we're on a journey to change it. And I see a lot of conversation on LinkedIn about that starting to happen, because there are so many interconnecting disciplines: project management, change management, communication, learning and development, organizational development. So if we can all work together, I think that's the road for success.
Yeah, well, that's probably easier said than done, because human beings can be a little bit tricky. Now, Brendan, what are the advantages of doing this? We've talked about a few different things about connecting with stakeholders, telling a story, making things a little bit clearer potentially. But why should we be doing it as project managers? Like, are there real key things that make storytelling beneficial for us to take on board?
Yeah, definitely. I think, for me, the difference between, and you see it through any sort of project management courses, the difference between a manager and a leader, for me, is the storytelling. The leader means that you are actually, you're considering things outside of just the management of the activities that you're looking at. We as humans, we're inherently biased. So we have to actually break the mold of that bias. We have to actually break out of that, and that's bringing in soft skills. For me, as an engineer in the construction industry, it was very difficult to do until you actually get to a certain level and you go, actually, you know what? The problem is there's not enough of these soft skills in here.
Yeah.
And only recently, since I've taken on the study of a master's of business psychology, has that really opened up the door to a different way of thinking.
Yeah, look, I did computer science about 10,000 years ago now, and then, got into project management as a fluke, really, through finance, working in finance. And then in 2015, I finished a sociology degree because I was bored, I thought, hey, I'll do something else. And it just completely changed my perspective on organisations and how organisations work, and not so much how people work, but it really broadened things out considerably. So I think probably as project managers, we don't necessarily go too far outside our comfort zone, and storytelling might be seen as one of those sort of, creative things that those people over there in change management do, Elena. Why should I be doing it?
I know I had a lot about fluffy stuff that change
Yeah.
management does, but drawing back onto Margaret's experience, when your project that you invested time, energy, money, millions of dollars is not adopted, and people revert back to the old ways of doing, that's mostly why when they start thinking, oh, we should have used a change manager with the expertise, which is not that fluffy anymore, because, if they did use it, it would have really impact. So I do unfortunately agree with you. There is a assumption that it's fluffy, but I think storytelling is a secret weapon. I wouldn't even say communication. It's a secret weapon of any professional. I never forget when I worked for Johnson & Johnson, there was one of the directors, he gave a speech and he started with, "We're saving lives. Every morning I wake up and save life of the person, and that's what you're doing here." And it's been, I don't know, 15 years since I finished working there, but I still remember that because it was so impactful, because I was able to see myself contributing to something bigger than me, bigger than my project. And I think if project managers can use that for their advantage, and advantage of the people they're delivering project for, because they do deliver it for people, right? Not
That's right.
just for the executives. I think they can't go wrong with that.
Fantastic. Okay, we're getting up to, we're just over 35 minutes now. So if you're watching, please subscribe to the channel. Give us a thumbs up. We'd love to I'd certainly love to have more subscribers. That would be fantastic. If you have a question that you would like covered on the Project Manager Clinic, please go to the website and send me something through, and the details will be in the description below. And also Will, Brendan and Elena's details. My last question really to talk a little bit about, can a good story save us from project failure or project disaster? Now that's the first thing. And secondly, how do we know when it's not the truth? So how do we sort of tell that authentic story in real life? So, Brendan, can I start with you? Can a good story save a project from real failure?
Oh, most definitely. And a good story, anyway, is told over time. I think if you're consistently reiterating the key facts of the story by repetition, you're going to relate back to that, right? But also, I think you've got to look at what your definition of failure is. I think some people's definition of failure, the project may never get there. But also other people, the failure might be in another area. So a good story or a good storyteller will obviously take control of the delivery of that project throughout, and they will set the scene. And it's definitely vital.
Yeah, look, that's very true, I think, because if we think about real leaders that we see around us, some of the best ones are those that are creating a narrative, telling a story and being authentic. And I guess we've got to try and see that authenticity in that leader, and that's something that we might, as project managers, might have to develop ourselves, that awareness. Elena, can it save us from impending disaster?
I'll be a bit more conservative than Brendan. I would say it depends where we're implementing the change story in a project. Because if we already lost people, we broke the trust. Rebuilding trust might take years for the same project. And I have a few examples where, it wasn't, storytelling wasn't used, people were not brought on the journey, and they didn't want to believe in anything. And I'm jumping in answering your second question, because trust is built on honesty and authenticity. So we are adults. We're not kids. You can't fool people. 90% of the time, people already know what's going on through social networks, gossips, that's released earlier than any change communication plan is even, thought of. So people can say, and they will, and this is why if we don't jump in first and create the story that people can believe in and sort of, jump on board with that, someone else create completely different story, which can be really disastrous for your project.
Yeah. Oh, that is a very, very good point, actually. And that is something that does happen at times. So this is a pretty good place to leave the session. It's been really fantastic. We've talked a lot about the storytelling and how we can take that on board and the benefits of storytelling for project managers. We've talked a little bit about the sort of tools that they can use, and obviously there are more. But thank you so much, Brendan, and thank you, Elena. It was really fantastic, incredibly informative, because, like I said, I didn't even know it was a thing. But not only is it a thing, it's a very valuable thing that we all should be taking on board and thinking about. So thank you so much. And again, for anyone watching, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and have a fantastic project day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. Thanks, Elena.
Thanks.